Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where you join me on Gleba, planet of weird swamp and fruit. And yes, fruit, or most of the resources on Gleba, are obtained in some way or shape or form by dealing with this fruit that we're harvesting out here. So we've got this agricultural tower, and these are a lot like the ones we had out on Lignumis. They work in a similar way, except whilst the ones on Lignumis that we can see here are burner towers, the ones over on Gleba are powered by electricity, hence we have these pylons coming in here to keep them running, and also to keep the inserters running for loading them up and unloading them. But similar to the other ones, they work in more or less the same way. You bring out a supply of seeds which are trickling along this belt. You can see some of them there, the little red things, and they'll be picked up, put into the tower, and then it'll reach out and plant them using the arm of doom here. You'll stick them in the ground, and then they'll start off small like this, and then they'll grow up into nice big healthy trees like these ones down here. And once the trees are fully grown, the arm will swing around, pull them out of the ground, and harvest the fruit from them. And then you get a load of fruit in here like this. Now we've also got a load of spoilage in here because some of the fruit has gone off. And so that brings me on to the other thing that makes Gleba a bit of an interesting challenge. And that is that because all of the stuff you're playing around with on this planet is organic, a lot of it will spoil if you leave it for too long. And you can tell how long something's got left on it by these white bars underneath the item. And those are showing their spoilage time. And if I go and have a look at some of the ones that are actually inside this tower, because then they're not moving and it's a lot easier to see them. I can mouse over this Yumako here, and you can see down there at the bottom, this is 94% fresh, which means in 56 minutes and 27 seconds, it will spoil and turn into what it says there as the spoil result. And that is, in this case, it is spoilage, which is basically just sort of rotted vegetable matter. And that's all fun and games, and it is something else you have to worry about when you're handling this planet, but it's not too much of a problem because, well, you saw there, you have an hour to take it down the belts and deal with it, but it does mean that if you keep your belts very, very full, then there's a chance that you're going to run into some issues here. And if you look at this belt over here, because we're feeding one belt onto a single side along here, we're only bringing in the fruit from the right hand side of this belt, and so all the stuff all the way along the left hand side is spoiled. Now that doesn't actually matter because it's just going to sit there and be a bit gross, but it's just going to stay there, so that's sort of okay. But you'll notice there's a bit on the other side that's spoiled here. Maybe it got pulled out of one of the more distant towers and for some reason took a very, very long time to get down here. Or maybe there's some other reason, who knows. But the point is that we've got polluted with a small amount of spoilage on the belt here. And that means whatever's been built up along here to deal with the fruit and turn it into something more useful has to also deal with spoilage. And we've got that happening here. There is a split that will take out any spoilage that comes up this belt and then send it down this one to be sent onto this belt and somehow disposed of. And so that's Gleba in a nutshell. You grow fruit in your little plantations out around the planet. There's some up here in the green area, some down here in the purple area. You bring in the fruit and then you try to make it into resources before it spoils. Gleba does have a few other resources though. You can see out here we've got some patches of stone. There's about just over 500,000 available here. There's a few other patches around, sort of 100,000 or so, and then another sort of good 500,000 in these scattered around these patches over here as well. And I'm quite surprised and a little bit jealous having seen these patches, because when I played through in single player, when I came out to Gleba, I reckon I had less than 100,000 stone in total in the whole area I explored, and now our starting patch has had 5 times that in the starting area, and that would have been extremely useful because, as you probably noticed, Gleba is an extremely wet planet. There's a reason I said it was a planet of swamps. There's loads of water down here, which means you can't build on any of this unless you put down landfill, and landfill is really expensive in stone. And so Tristan has been busily digging up the stone from the patches over here and feeding it into machines to make landfill, just to keep us going, to allow us to build on this ridiculous swampy planet. And I didn't have this, I had to bring it all in by spaceship, which was utter nonsense, but oh well, it kind of worked in the end, I suppose. As well as the stone and the fruit, you also get little rocky things that with a load of metal in them. So if I look down here, yes, here we go, here are some of them. These blue things are iron stromatolites, and if you beat one of these up, then as it suggests over on the side, you get out a certain quantity of iron bacteria, some iron ore and some stone. And the iron bacteria is another thing that spoils. If I go over and grab one of these myself like that, you can pick them up really, really quickly. But you can see here we've got another spoilage bar on there. So in only 1 minute, this iron bacteria will turn into iron ore. And so that means when you're going around going, okay, I need some iron ore to get my factory started, you can just go around punching them, and then everything you pick up, the iron ore and the iron bacteria will all turn into iron ore, and therefore it's going to be useful and valuable for making your iron. But it does mean when you're trying to do anything else with it, you have to keep a bit of an eye on it because it does decay quite quickly. There is a similar sort of orangey rock available as well, which is exactly the same but for copper. So you've got copper bacteria here and also copper ore and a little bit of stone. So these will help tide you over and get you started. And all those resources are perfectly standard vanilla resources. However, we're not playing vanilla, we're playing Planetary Pioneers, and that means everything has to be a little bit more complicated. And because we've got lignumis, we need a supply of wood on this planet as well. And we get that in the form of this stuff, the water cane. And so if we go over here and pluck one of these, we'll get 2 water cane out. And water cane is an interesting plant, so you can just stick that straight back in the water to have it grow again. Or you can process it and turn it into wood. And so Tristan has set up another couple of machines over here. These are more of the same sort of agricultural towers, but instead of growing the fruit, these are actually just growing water cane. So you can see out here we've got some tiny water cane like that one, and then we've got some bigger ones over here like this that are all probably almost ready to be harvested, and the machine is busily swinging around grabbing them. And then we're unloading them, putting them into a chest here where they can then be processed into wood as much as required, and then anything that's left, and then the wood can be taken away, and we can also bring in water cane, just keep that going round and round in the loop here to make sure it all gets replanted and processed. And this is an interesting use of a diagonal inserter. So Tristan has all the water cane going out into a steel chest because he doesn't want the bots to get involved with that. But he then has a diagonal inserter loading it from that steel chest back into the agricultural tower. And then also another normal inserter over here, putting the water cane into this assembly machine to turn into wood, but only doing that when we have more than 100 water cane in the box over here. So that ensures we've always got plenty available to grow into more water cane, but when there's plenty of it, we can output it into here, turn it into wood, and ship it off to be used. And that's it for the Glebian resources. That is all we have to play with on this planet. But fortunately, from those you can make lots and lots of other things. But first, you need to get all of that stuff started. And so when we first landed here, Mark sent Mike off to the southeast to go and find some copper bacteria and somewhere to plant some jelly nut. He also sent Saphir off to the northwest to do similar things with Yamako and the copper ore. And that allowed us to get started on some of the sciences by grabbing an iron stromatolite in order to get an agricultural tower, grabbing some jelly stem to get to learn how to process jelly nut and iron bacteria, similarly with Yamako for the copper bacteria and the Yamako mash. And then once we got those, we were then able to make a quantity of nutrients in order to unlock the biochamber, another way to make nutrients, and making a few other things and starting to get generally processing on this planet. I'm not going to go through everything here, but going through and getting these first few up and available was quite useful and quite important, because it got us the agricultural towers, which allowed Saphir to start growing Yamako, Mike to start growing the jelly nut, and Tristan to start growing the wood. Now that we had all of our resources up and running, it was time to start making the actual products on this planet, the things that were actually going to come in useful and allow us to make all the things that we need to have here. And Mark's intention with this planet was to split everywhere up into sort of separate town areas. So for example, here's one down here that Mike produced in order to produce the bioflux. And bioflux is a sort of a general all-purpose resource that you use a lot around this planet. And it's made by bringing in a load of the Yamako fruit here and the jelly nut fruit here, processing each of those, so you get the Yamako mash and the jelly nut jelly. And then those can be combined together in a biochamber in order to produce the bioflux. The funny thing about biochambers, though, is that they all have to be fueled, and they specifically have to be fueled by nutrients, so you need to pass some of the nutrients into them in order to keep them running and make them work. They use this like a fuel, in fact, so as you can see here, it's trickling out as the machine operates, and allowing it to run and produce the bioflux. But you need to make the nutrients, and producing nutrients is sort of interesting, because there are a number of ways to do it. The standard way to get started is to get hold of some spoilage, which is easy enough. You just need some fruit that's gone off a bit, so that's really, really easy. And then you can turn spoilage into a little bit of nutrients, but they'll already come out a little bit spoiled, so you only have 2.5 minutes to get to use those up. But once you've got some of those, you can then feed them into a biochamber that's doing the bioflux production recipe, and then you can then turn that bioflux into more nutrients in another biochamber. So you need to have got 2 biochambers up and fed, so you need one of them to be producing the bioflux, and then another one like this one to also be fed with some nutrients to then be producing more nutrients. So it's sort of a loop thing. It goes round and round, and you get more and more and more nutrients out the more it runs. Because those nutrients are probably going to go off at some point. You see those 11 there are about to expire in another there we go, just like that. So we've got a load of spoilage in there. That has to be disposed of. So there is an additional inserter here that will chuck that out onto this disposal belt to take it away. And that is going to be a very, very common thing around this factory. You're going to see a lot of systems where there is something there to take the results of the spoilage away. And we've seen this sort of thing on other planets to an extent, but Gleba turns it up to an even higher level than even than Cubium does. And so this was the initial bioflux production area, but it wasn't producing enough. And so Mike then expanded it to produce another area over here. And you can see this is several times as big. So instead of having 3 machines producing bioflux, we've got 8 machines. So it's almost 3 times as fast. And that means we're having to have slightly more machines making the Yamako mash and the jelly nut jelly. But that's fine. That's what you need to do. You just need to expand it out a little bit. And he's got this sort of nice system where he's feeding the nutrients all the way around here and somehow getting them over to here. Oh, I see. There's another belt bringing them around here. But that does mean eventually the ones on the end of the belt here, because they're sitting still, they will eventually spoil. And that's why there's another belt here to take the spoilage away and dump it down the disposal chute here to be taken away to wherever spoilage goes, basically. The other thing worth mentioning while I'm talking about pulping fruit is that pulping the fruit also produces the Yamako or the jelly nut seeds, depending on which one you're squishing. And you can see there's a fairly small chance of that coming out. But each seed is capable of being grown into 50 Yamako fruit. So that is actually a closed loop system. And then once you take into account that all of the biochambers have a 50% productivity bonus, you'll find that you actually eventually get quite a lot more seeds than you need, which is very useful because they come in very handy in a few other places as well. From here, the bioflux is then taken away for making other important things around the base. And as I said, we're working on a sort of a town-based system up here. There's this one in here, which is another one of Mike's. This seems to be the Mike show for the time being. And he's got this quite nice, elegant double loop system going on here, which he's quite proud of. And I can see why, because it does look quite pretty. And because Mark's objective was for all of the towns to be reasonably self-sufficient and just bring in bioflux and fruit and then do what they need to with that, well, we've got a supply of bioflux coming in here. And actually, this particular area where we're making sulfur doesn't need fruit. So he's got some machines over here with what's now going to seem like a fairly standard system for making nutrients. So we've got a machine at the top here that will do an emergency bootstrap, turning spoilage into nutrients, and then that can dump it out onto the belt here. It can be taken up by this machine. This one's also doing spoilage into nutrients. So I guess we're assuming that we're always going to have some nutrients available to keep this one running, and it's just going to dispose of spoilage. So that's slightly odd, because that won't be able to bootstrap the system if the whole thing fails and everything turns into spoilage. However, we've got enough bioflux coming in that I suspect we can just keep the nutrients on here replenished and just keep making new fresh nutrients whenever we need to. Anyway, to that note, there is then this additional machine down here. This is doing the bioflux into nutrients recipe, and that's making sure there's plenty of that available. So that can then be passed around here into these machines where the actual sulfur is being made. And sulfur is a weird one because it's made out of spoilage. So spoilage does have some uses other than just bootstrapping nutrient production. But that takes in the bioflux as well, and along with the spoilage, and will then produce some sulfur which can be shipped away down this belt. Now it looks like this is horribly broken because this machine has run out of nutrients. But the reason it's run out of nutrients is because it has filled up completely with spoilage, and so it can't bring in any more nutrients. And it's filled up with spoilage because it's using the sulfur disposal belt to dispose of the spoilage as well. And because we're not using any sulfur, it's not getting rid of any spoilage. So, in other words, as soon as we start using the sulfur again, that will get pulled through, we'll be able to unload the spoilage, and the system will just start working again. So, this despite the fact there's an error message showing up here, this is absolutely fine. It's working brilliantly. I don't have any criticisms here, with the possible exception of, well, we've got enough sulfur, but we're still burning through bioflux in order to make nutrients, so it's just going off on the belt, which seems a little bit wasteful. But then, bioflux does kind of just grow on trees, so maybe it's not the end of the world. Next door to that, we have another one of Mike's builds, and you can sort of spot his with the double loop arrangements he seems to have going on in quite a lot of them. And over here, he's got one little area here that's once again exactly the same sort of spoilage into nutrients and then bioflux into nutrients-based system. And then he's bringing in Yamako fruit as well as the bioflux, and then he's squashing that down in pulping it into Yamako mash, which is being brought down here, then back up over here on the other side, where we've got another one of the nutrient generation loops. And this one's making plastic. So to make plastic, you take bioflux and Yamako mash. So then we've now got the same sort of thing here, but instead of bringing in Yamako, he's bringing in Yamako mash. Fine. And then that's being turned into plastic. And we are using a little bit of plastic. So both of these machines seem to still be quite happy. They've got plenty of throughput going through them, and so that's keeping them reasonably fresh. The reason all of these things are designed to be their own sort of self-contained little block areas is because some of the products, like the Yamako mash, go off really quite quickly. If we have a look at this one over here, you can see it's only got a 3-minute spoil time when it's completely fresh. And so you don't want to be dragging this all over the factory to try and find somewhere that's going to be able to accept it. You want to be able to bring it over as quickly as possible from where it's mashed over to where it's being made into plastic. Now, in the case of plastic, the exact freshness isn't particularly important because plastic is what I tend to refer to as a dry good or a dry ingredient, in that it doesn't have a spoilage timer on it. So you could put in Yamako mash that was at 1% time left on it, and you'd still get out plastic that's just as good as if it was at 99% freshness. However, there are some things that we'll get onto a bit later where it's a bit more important to try and keep stuff fresh. personally, I think if I was building this system here, I would probably have been very, very tempted to combine the two nutrient loops. They're a bit of a distance apart, sure, but I feel like they're close enough that you wouldn't have lost too much freshness running it around there. But never mind, it doesn't matter. This is perfectly functional. It works nicely. I'm not going to actually criticise it properly. The next system over, this one was by Sophia, and so it's a slightly different sort of feel and layout and design and so on, but the basic principles are pretty much the same. We've got a system over here that's bringing in lots and lots of spoilage that comes from wherever it's produced in this area, and then turning that into nutrients, and then there's another machine at the top that will turn bioflux into nutrients to keep it topped up. It's slightly hard to tell which one's the priority of these. I think the ones making it from spoilage, yes, the ones making it from spoilage appear to be the priority, and then the one making it from bioflux is the lower priority. But between them, they can keep a nice steady flow of nutrients going, and then some of the excess, when enough has been produced, can be passed down here, and then go up into the rest of the system. So we've got some coming up into this bank over here, and then there's an underground belt here that's bringing some of it over here as well, and presumably, yes, and again to over here to be fed into the first step. And so this time we're pulping down the jelly nut to make the jelly. So jelly comes out in nice and neat cube form from the fruit, and then we're passing that over to these systems up here, these two sort of vertical banks. It's being fed round and round and round, so it keeps flowing, and therefore any spoilage that gets generated on the belt will be disposed of down here. That means we don't need a thing on the end of the belt dumping spoilage out as we've seen in a few other places. We can just let it flow round, and it'll be pulled out as it gets down to here. So both of those are perfectly sensible ways of doing it. It looks like both Mike and Sophia have gone for that sort of system with you. You can see there's pulling the spoilage out there, pulling spoilage out here. That's working nicely, and the other advantage of it is it gets around the slight risk of the jelly being at various different freshness levels. Because, for example, imagine if we had a sudden run on jelly, so that we stopped using up the jelly that was produced by the first couple of machines, and then started using the jelly that was produced by the bottom ones. Well, this is significantly less fresh than the jelly up at the top. And so if we just had this flow out on a belt and then go up to a stopping point at the end, and then we unloaded anything that was spoilage from there, then you run into the risk of having some fresh jelly up at the top, which won't be taken out by a filtered inserter or a filtered splitter, and then random bits of spoilage on the belt down the side that can't get grabbed by these machines, and that can cause the whole system to jam up, and don't ask me how I know this. So this in a way is a much better system because it keeps everything flowing and fresh, and means you can remove any waste, anything that's gone off a bit as it goes round the loop. So I do quite like this system, and maybe I should use it a bit more myself. Anyway, that's got me a little bit off topic. The reason we're bringing all this jelly over here is because you can make rocket fuel from jelly by combining it with bioflux and water. Now, water is really, really easy to get on this planet because it's so wet and swampy. You can put down an offshore pump almost anywhere you want and pull out a load of water, feed that over into your production system, and boom, there's all your water for your rocket fuel production. And the reason we're producing so much rocket fuel, not only are we using it to power our rockets, but this is basically where all of the power for the factory comes from. Because, well, solar power isn't amazing on Gleba, probably because all the clouds, because you might have noticed it's raining quite a lot, it's raining basically constantly on this planet. And so therefore batteries aren't great either because you need the solar. Now, generating fuel from steam is fine because there's loads and loads of water, but you need something to burn. And you can burn the spoilage, but there's not very much energy in it. And you can burn some of the other fruity byproducts as well. But once again, there's not an enormous amount of energy in that. You're far better off processing it into rocket fuel and then burning that to generate your electricity, because you can make rocket fuel really quite easily, as you can see here. And then the rocket fuel can be passed off down to a system like this, where you can just chuck it into the heating towers. And that's another new Gleban thing. You have these heating towers which you put flammable stuff into, which they will then burn, and you can see how quickly all the spoilage is disappearing when it's chucked in here, and it's not really raising the temperature very much. And then you can use that heat to go into heat exchangers, a bit like from a nuclear power plant, and also then pump in water from an offshore pump, and boom, you get loads and loads of steam power. And it's really, really easy to generate all the power this way. To make sure that we don't use up too much rocket fuel, because these machines will keep going, they will keep burning anything you put into them, even when they're at full temperature, we've got these inserters here set to only insert when the temperature drops below 550. And at that point, they'll throw in some rocket fuel and the towers will kick in again. And as you can see, rocket fuel lasts a bit longer and will add a bit more onto the temperature of the tower. And so this gives us a nice, steady, safe power supply. But as part of the trying to keep all of the towns fairly separate and self-sufficient, Mark has asked us to put little power supply areas like this into all of the different towns, and then make sure we're taking in a feed of rocket fuel, and then we can use that to burn off any excess spoilage as well if we want to. The next thing Sophia got up to was a little bit of mild genocide. And this involves... So, on this planet, there are some enemies. And they are known as pentapods, imaginatively enough, because they have 5 legs each. And there are 3 types of them. These guys are the medium ones, and they're called strafers because they tend to run in circles around whatever they're attacking, lobbing off little biological missiles that buzz over like annoying insects and then hit that whatever that thing is and attack it a little bit. There are 2 other types as well, and we'll keep an eye out for those. But the interesting thing I've come over here to see is these egg rafts, and these will spawn in the pentapods based on some pollution in much the same way that the biters do over on Norvis, except the pollution's a little bit different, and we'll talk about that too at some point. However, when you destroy one of these, they leave eggs behind, and you can claim those eggs, and then you can start to breed them. And that's what Sophia has set up over here. So we've got a stream of bioflux coming in, as we have in many other places. And that's coming in to be turned into nutrients down here. I'm not sure how. Oh yes, there's a bootstrapping system over here that will take in any spoilage and turn it into nutrients for when the system has ground to a halt and needs to be kicked back into motion again. And then we have these biochambers along here, and these take in some nutrients and some pentapod eggs and some water, and they will produce more pentapods. So you bring in 1 pentapod egg and you release 2, because I guess they produce through mitosis or something like that. And this, as you can imagine, allows you to breed up larger and larger quantities of pentapod eggs. And so those are then fed out along the belt here, where we're making sure there's always enough in the machines, but then any excess can be left out on the belt to be passed around. And then they're being brought up here along the belt here, where they're being fed into these biochambers up here, and these are making the Gleba science pack. And so that's made by bringing in bioflux and pentapod eggs, which will not come as any huge surprise since everything seems to use bioflux. And then we can turn that into the local science packs. But those also have a spoil timer on them, so they only last for an hour, which means we need to get them from here, where we're growing the science packs, into a rocket, and then all the way over to Norvis in less than an hour, otherwise they will spoil and they'll turn into nothing useful. And as you can see here, when they spoil, they just turn into spoilage, and you can't really do very much with spoilage, except I suppose we've seen us turning it into sulfur, so maybe you can do something with it. But it's not particularly useful for doing science with. And the other problem with this is the less fresh it is, the less science you get out of it. So at the moment, this one's at 86%, which means when it runs, it'll last 86% of the chance of a normal science pack of the same sort of quality and level and so on. So if it takes you 45 minutes to get them over there, then you're going to need to transport 4 times as many science packs over in order to get the same amount of science done. But if you can get them over there and use in half an hour, then you only need to transport twice as many. So it's very important to try and transport them as quickly as you possibly can, and not leave them just sitting on belts gradually decaying. So I mentioned that the bioscience spoils down into spoilage, as is fairly traditional. Unfortunately, the pentapod eggs spoil into actual pentapods, a big premature wriggler pentapod. So every so often, we'll have a load of them will burst out of their eggs in this area here, and that's why there's all these lightning turrets set up along the middle of this, because then when they pop out and suddenly hatch, we can zap them very quickly and tell them to behave and stop attacking things. So you'll notice there are, in a few places around the factory, there are a load of these systems set up to make sure that the locals don't get a little bit too handsy with some of our equipment. Speaking of the locals, over here you can see all 3 types of pentapods. There's the little wriggly guys under there. He's walking underneath the strafer at the moment. I say walking, he's wriggling under the strafer. These guys are called wrigglers. They tend to come up and try and nibble on things. And then they've got their very big brothers, and these are the stompers, and they're the largest type of pentapod, and they all tend to walk over and try and step on things and just sort of stomp them into oblivion. And they are a bit dangerous because they're quite big and heavy and will tend to destroy stuff. There's an engineer for scale. You can see me up there lurking just out of range. I'm probably similar scale to the wriggler and much smaller than the other 2. However, the thing you'll notice is that this is oh, they spotted me. Run away! So there we go. There's one of the biological missiles that the strafers shoot at you, and there's a load more small wrigglers because my personal lasers attacked the egg raft. And while we're at it, look, you can see down there. There are some of the eggs that I was talking about earlier, and that's where you get them from in the first place. And the missiles will eventually land and turn into additional wrigglers to make things even more complicated. Okay, so I have apparently made some friends. But the other thing I wanted to note as I was messing around over here, there's some more big guys, is that those are small stompers, and that's a medium strafer. You can tell it's gone a bit yellow. And there's a small strafer there. So these guys aren't actually the biggest things that Gleba has to throw at us. We may well be encountering some even larger ones later. And when you kill them, they have this terrible habit of turning into a lot more enemies that you then have to deal with. At least unless you use very high explosives like I did then, where the splash damage tends to just take absolutely everything out. Sorry about that. I hope you weren't too looking forward to seeing them all wriggle around at me. And on that rather squishy and violent note, I think I'm going to call it the end of the episode. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll be back to play some more Planetary Pioneers on Monday at 7:30 PM UK time, so come along then if you want to see how we're getting on with Gleba and the various other planets around the system. If you'd like to give Planetary Pioneers a try yourself, then you can grab the mod from the Factorio mod portal, install it and have a good play around with it and see how you get on with all these weird planets. Although, to be honest, this one is not that weird because it's in vanilla as well, so you'll probably be able to find it there if you do a little bit of looking. I'll be back on Wednesday as well to play some more Foundry. Things are getting weird and interesting now because I'm playing with some of the alien technologies in Foundry, which means we're getting various teleport chests and some various funny new toys like that as well. So definitely enjoying those. But I'm hoping they're going to be improving on the trains and I'm going to be able to have another play with those at some point in the near future. There will, of course, be videos coming out every Thursday and Friday on the channel, so please make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of those. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.